Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've made a decision that, amongst all the other things that are important to me as a senator, on the hierarchy of importance, I want to raise awareness, promote debate, stimulate consideration for solutions to what is a very, very serious problem in our nation, and that is to do with domestic violence. It is one of the subject matters, Mr. President, that I think is of concern to every member of Parliament here in the federal Parliament, here in the federal Senate, as well as state governments and organisations everywhere that are involved either directly or indirectly of the delivery of services where we set out to try and create a safer environment for women, children, the aged and the disabled, who are four particular cohorts of Australians who are seriously vulnerable to this scourge, this cultural scourge that we have on our nation. Mr. Acting Deputy President, Australians one and all would cringe at the thought that we are a nation. They would cringe at the thought that we are a nation where annually almost 30,000 women need to make an application to a court because they are fearful. All other avenues on their part to resolve their domestic situation exhausted, they turn to the court system to afford them protection from whatever threat it is that they consider is at the heart of their issue. Of those 26,500, in fact, to be accurate, domestic violence orders that are issued, almost 12,000 of them, 44% of them, is breached. Those breaches require a contact between a person ordered by the courts to stay away from the complainant, for want of a better term, or the applicant. And of course most of these orders are for women. Most of the offenders who breach the orders are men. We lose a woman almost each week in this country, 36 a year. In my own home state, there have been 3 domestic violence deaths this year alone, just in Queensland, all on the Gold Coast. 3 violent domestic-related events where women have died on the Gold Coast alone in the month of January and this part of February. We now have the shame of stating that domestic violence is the leading cause of illness and preventable death for women aged between 15 and 44. The largest leading cause of illness and preventable death for women aged between 15 and 44. It's not cardiovascular. It's not to do with smoking. It's not to do with cancers. Not to do with obesity, it's to do with domestic violence. And yet, I observe, and I don't make this a criticism, it's simply an observation, that we spend more time in this place and the other place, and governments generally, talking about other matters of importance to our community. For example, terrorism, significantly important. It's important for our nation to feel safe. In fact, we've invested $1.5 billion here in the last couple of sittings last year, as we should, to support the military effort in protecting women and children in the Middle East. And $500 million invested in upgrading and resourcing our security services and their partners in this country to make us feel safe. And we've had tragedies. We lost 2 people to terrorism, be it was seemed to be a confined event to an individual, but nonetheless, no one is going to split straws over the incident where we tragically lost 2 Australians. But in the same year that we had 2 people killed from terrorism, and that remains rare, and I hope it remains rare for the best of our natural lives, we did not invest $1.5 billion in measures that might in some way mitigate and neutralise the impact of this insidious characteristic in Australia. And the statistics, as alarming as they might be, of course need to be taken into context. There have been credible peer-reviewed studies that suggest that almost 80% of women who've had an event that would constitute an assault or an act of domestic violence did not report the event to the authorities. As we draw upon these statistics and try and make sense of them, we can do so with the knowledge that the problem is much worse than it appears. Much worse than it appears. From my own experience and from the research that my office has assisted me in conducting, it would appear that in most instances where a woman or a child is killed in an act of domestic violence, the event was potentially foreseeable. Potentially foreseeable. In some instances, it would have been graded as being a probability. Yet our society right across Australia does not seem to have the ability to curb this terrible infliction. In fact, we don't even regard the perpetrators as suffering from a psychotic condition. It doesn't have its own graded psychosis. It has no respect for the perpetrators. This isn't something that can be sheeted away to traditionally some low socio-economic end of things. These people who commit this offence, some of them working in the communities as doctors and dentists and carers themselves to others, coming back into their own home, into the privacy of their own home, and inflicting psychological, sexual and physical harm and damage to their partners, to their parents, to their children, the strong over the weak. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I intend to increase my tempo, that as we consider everything we do in this place, and it won't be applicable to everything, but as we do, we need to apply the test. As we consider legislation, as we consider adjustments to social support, we need to consider what element of it needs to be held up against the prism of trying to reduce domestic violence, increase and resource the protection for women and children and the other vulnerable cohorts within our society. We all have to start talking about it because, in my mind, it is one of the most serious priorities for our nation. What are we if we are not a nation of people who can protect the vulnerable? What are we if we are not a nation of people who respect the relationship we have with those who are meant to be our near and dear, our loved ones, and affording them the protection in our own homes We have to just concentrate on this with everything we do. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.